is a panel. It's not a panel discussion, but it's going to be a conversation. First, we are going to start with a presentation by Vidya Reddy from Thilir. We all know her, and she's going to do a very interesting short presentation for us on online interests, offline consequences. Following which, there will be a conversation by Mr. Nandkumar Sarvade, and Vidya is going to start with the presentation, and then the conversation will follow. So, Vidya, I'll ask you to introduce yourself and Mr. Sarvade as well.
Good afternoon. It's just back when we started, a year after we started, I began to see this intersection between digital technology and sexual violence on children and how it was affecting case presentation, how sexual violence was committed on children. And I got a little more interested in it, and it's actually a whole separate area of work which I would encourage any NGO to take up on its own as a standalone, because it's just while it's a cross-cutting area in sexual violence, it's just too vast and mutates so fast rather than evolves so fast to be doing it alongside working on sexual violence, like what we do. It gives me it's a great honor and privilege to introduce to you all Mr. Nandkumar Sarvade. I would say one of the very few people in governance in this country who understands the issues of sexual violence while it intersects with children and their practices and experiences online. I first met Mr. Sarvade when he was the IPS officer seconded to NASSCOM way back in 2007. Subsequently to that, he took voluntary retirement from the IPS and has worked with Citibank, ICICI, Ernst & Young, and is now the CEO of the DSCI, the Data Security Council of India, which is an independent agency authorized by NASSCOM. It's a self-regulatory agency authorized by NASSCOM. And thank you, Mr. Sarvade, for making it here today with us. So before we start the actual conversation with Mr. Sarvade, I mean, we've been hearing so much about banned pornography, banned child pornography. And then yesterday we read about how 2 days ago the government has announced a 400 crore scheme to address child pornography. And then today I read something about the national data encryption policy. And these are very worrying things because, as I often start my presentations, how many of you, and I can't see, but I will try, but how many of you in this room do not have a smartphone? Wow, I'm the only dinosaur that means. Okay, two of us, all right. 5 years ago, perhaps, I would have asked the question, how many of you do not have a cell phone? And I think we need to understand that technology is such an integral part of our lives. It's an extension of our hands. And it influences now the way we relate to people, the way we experience life. And I think alongside, it also changes the way crime is planned, crime is committed, crime is presented. So I think we need to keep that in mind. Can we start the presentation? Yeah. So is it online consequences of offline interest? It was very interesting listening to the previous speaker. Is it online consequences of offline interest? How do I work this? Okay. Is it online consequences of offline interest, or is it online interest of offline consequences? That's still a very, very, and I think that is something we should keep in mind. When we're talking about the intersection of digital technology and sexual violence against children. Janvi, it's not working. So a couple of, this has become the fact that, in fact, this is the year of the Digital India Party. So the whole idea of government is to roll out, the whole digital technology across India. There's a lot of emphasis in rolling out broadband across India. In fact, now the whole emphasis is on mobile phones. Now it's again not working. Can you just operate it from the back, please?
Next slide should change it.
Yeah, next slide. Yeah. The fact that now, most often, that the internet is being accessed through mobile phones. About 2 months ago, I read something about Flipkart taking its entire platform onto a mobile platform, just because they don't see the point of going through the whole, actual computer PC's way. So we're looking at mobile phones accessible to everyone. By I think, from December last year to this year, India has added on 120 million users of mobile phones, new users of mobile phones. So I think even with the low internet penetration rate, even with the fact that a mobile phone, even with the Chinese-made versions, which are only about a couple of $100, even with that being a little very out of bounds for many people, in terms of sheer raw numbers, India is sitting on a huge communication technology boom. Can we go to the next slide? Pornography is passe. I know this is an extremely loaded statement to make, but pornography is passe. Can we keep going, please? The fact is that it seeks rather than be sought. We're spammed every time we open our mail. We're spammed with pornography, and and unfortunately, it's become almost a rite of passage. Earlier, what used to be in brown paper covered books has now moved online. And I think that's something we have to accept, that at 15 and 16 and 14 or whatever, even younger, however young people are when they're online and they understand their sexual interests, the very fact that their curiosity is going to make them look for things, no longer are they going to rely on even peers anymore. They're just going to go into any of the search engines, put in whatever they want, and they're going to see a whole bunch of sites. Unfortunately, the problem is young people do not have the discernment to understand what they're seeing is probably unreal, not very real, not very accurate in its information. And it causes great distress and trauma to a child who definitely will not given an alternative forum to understand what they're seeing. Because on one side, we give them access to a lot of information, and the other side, we withhold the possibilities of them understanding this information in an accurate, appropriate way. Yeah. Can we go to the next slide? Now I have a huge problem. Do we call it child pornography or do we call it child sexual abuse images? And I think it's very important to get the semantics right here, because child pornography, we've been doing these rough straw polls across, and when we say child pornography, most people think it's children watching pornography. And they don't seem to understand the seriousness and the gravity of it's actually images of children being sexually abused. So I think we need to keep that in mind when we use this word. I know the media has often told me that it sends their word count haywire to say child sexual abuse images instead of child porn. But I think it's very important for us at least to keep this in mind, that we are talking about child sexual abuse images. Can we go to the next one? Keep going. Definitely, there's an increased accessibility, affordability, and usability of computers and mobile telephony, increasing the ease of possession of child abuse images, decreasing the cost of production. You can make a child sexual abuse video at home on a mobile phone. Decreasing the cost of production, revolutioning the distribution and sale of images. We all know what happens with WhatsApp and Facebook. Unfortunately, what's also happening alongside is what started off earlier as a non-commercial aspect of sexual violence against children, then moved into a commercial aspect with looking at organized crime, getting into child sexual abuse images, has also now parallelly gone back to being very non-commercial in the way imagery is created and distributed. Now, I don't know how many of you have had cases, but this has been a very repeated phenomena with us in the last 3 or 4 years, that many of our cases, the children keep saying they were shown images of child sexual abuse and groomed in that way. They were shown kids laughing, enjoying it, saying, let's try it, making it out to be a fun thing. It used to entice other children. It's used to blackmail kids. It helps in the rationalization. Perhaps earlier when you had an sexual interest in children, you would kind of slap yourself on the wrist and say, we shouldn't think that way, and kind of think about something else. And now all you have to do is go and search for something, and you see thousands of websites, millions of websites, giving you a sense of rationalization to understand what you are seeing is perhaps okay. It helps in the cognitive distortion which you're anyway going through. And it increases the network of offenders. You realize you're not the only one. There are many people out there. The whole huge area of worry now is that child sexual abuse images is part of the whole dark web and is not shared into P2P networks. Can we go to the next one? So how many Indians, when I first started doing these presentations, people would say, oh, this doesn't happen in India. We just mainly watch pornography. This happens mainly in other countries. So how many Indians watch child sexual abuse images? Can we go to the next one? This is from the National Study on Child Sexual Abuse, National Study on Child Abuse, 2001, April. This was done across 13 states, if I'm not mistaken. That's why these states are mentioned. And I'd like you to look at the state and age breakup of children reporting being photographed in the nude. Yeah, we all have this hang up of having little babies photographed, because they look so cute in their diapers and stuff. But look at the children between 13 and 14, 15 and 18, the percentages of children who have been who are reporting being photographed in the nude. And you wonder what was happening that they were photographed in the nude. And that's something very interesting, which unfortunately from 2007, not much has been taken into account when government has been talking about any policies regarding addressing this whole online issue of children and sexual violence. Can we go to the next one? About 4.46% reported being photographed. Of this, 52.1% were boys, 47 girls, a majority in the age group of 5 to 12, 28 were in the 15 to 18, and 23.8 were in the 13 to 14 age group. It's something really of concern. It makes you wonder what was happening. This was way back in 2007 when many of us didn't even have cell phones which had a camera facility. Okay, next one. Yeah, this is just again to establish about Indians being interested in child pornography. In 2004, the Consul General of India in Houston, in America, the embassies are divided into various consulate regions. He had to actually send out a circular to the Indian student associations in his jurisdiction saying, you know what, child pornography is a crime in this country. Because in a sting operation after sting operation, Indian students were being arrested for viewing and paying for child pornography. The next one. So how many of you have heard of Operation Sweetie? Yeah, Operation Sweetie, in the stakeout which happened for Operation Sweetie, by the way, was a virtual image of a child created in the Philippines. It was a TDH project, and they basically wanted to see it was to establish that how many nationalities across are interested in any sort of sexual activity with a child. And they did a stakeout, and in the stakeout, they found in that 24-hour stakeout, there were at least 100 Indians from India. The IP protocol showed India who actually were interested in having sex with a child. There's another case which I can quote to you in Coimbatore where two students in the 11th standard had an argument in class. The boy put up a picture of the girl with her telephone number saying she was 15 years old and she offers services, and within 24 hours she got a humongous amount of calls asking for her services. Despite the fact knowing that she was only 15 years old. So, can we go to the next one? This is, in fact, when Danya was talking about media and how NGOs work with media, this is something actually which the media actually helped in this case. This was when on a Facebook page, and this is very interesting for those of you who, all of us have angst at various times at various social media networks, but still, this was very interesting because this was a Facebook page put up with very innocuous looking pictures of children, and which were taken off the net or taken off children just walking to school. Pictures were taken surreptitiously, and they were posted, and with a simple thing, with a headline saying, "What shall we do?" It was in, I know it was in Tamil, it was in Malayalam for sure. What shall we do? And it was very, it doesn't attract anybody's attention. As Facebook says, it doesn't violate our community standards. However, the comments which followed that picture and what shall we do were the most sexually violent, graphic comments. They were horrendously graphic and violent. And what was very interesting is that the police went after the people who commented and not just the administrators. Facebook refused to take down the page, by the way, because all the comments were transliterated in English, so they didn't understand. Their AI algorithms didn't pick up the violation of community standards. So finally, the police had to make sure they take it down, and the police actually arrested the commentators rather than just the administrators, which I think is a great progress in the way they're looking at how people's sexual interest in children were. So there's a huge outcry of how Facebook should be banned and etc. Now my point here was, I think what this was an indication was that if 3,000 people like an image or like comments of a particular person saying what they want to do to a little girl eating an ice cream, that makes you wonder of how many people out there have a sexual interest in children whom you probably didn't even think about. That's something very important to think about, that this was an indication that the person next door, and from the rest, the police were able to understand one man was a grocery store owner, another man worked in a courier company, another person worked in a share broking firm. So these were just people who had regular routine lives and, boring jobs. Next one. This is just to give you an idea of Indians again. Nancy, keep going. Vaikunta Soundarajan, next one, Nancy. Anurag Tiwari, the next one is Gopi Chand Pai. These were all software engineers arrested in Silicon Valley for, and this is not the rarefied atmosphere of Silicon Valley which made them this way, but these were all software engineers arrested in Silicon Valley for actually having these online sexualized conversations with young people and then actually going to the safe houses where the undercover cop was based to meet up with these young people. One of them, in fact, Gopi Chand Pai went with a bag of condoms, knowing fully well that the undercover cop had posed as a 13-year-old. So I think about the fact that these people were in India, what their interests would have been. The next one. Next one, Nancy. This is Himanshu Upadhyaya. And this is very another important question to think about because there's this huge blurring between pornography and child sexual abuse images. So do people who collect pornography or view pornography as likely to commit an offense against a child as those who only collect child pornography? And I think there's been a series of studies. There's been, this is from the Volak study of 2000. The next one, there is, and this shows only 45% contact offenses only. There were no child pornography. And if you add up the rest, it comes to 55. Can we go to the next one? The US Postal. This was Hernandez's study. Hernandez actually was asked by the US government to do the study, and then the findings were so startling. She found 76% of people who collected child pornography or child sexual abuse images actually contact offended, so they embargoed the study. But by that time, she had already started presenting at academic forums. So all of us had a copy of the study. The next one. And this again is the US Postal Department Inspections Services study, which showed that only 35% of people who watched pornography actually abused against a child, as opposed to the 65% who viewed child sexual abuse images. We go to the next one. And if really speaking, these are the most visible children, actually speaking, but the most forgotten children, because they're just children on the net. You don't really know very much about them. Victim identification is hardly known about, and nobody makes an effort. Can we go to the next one? But there is one story before I end this presentation I'd like to tell you, and this was one of the most horrendous stories, and this also tells you this is not an urban metro phenomena. This is anywhere where there is technology and there is access to the internet. So this was in a little village in a district in West Bengal. A young girl of 15 was found talking to another boy of 15 from another tribe. And so the panchayat said the punishment was that she was stripped and had to be paraded through 3 villages naked. While she was being paraded, all the other village youth took pictures of her on their phones. They made it into a CD, and it was being sold in the district headquarter market, the weekly market. A journalist there got hold of the CD and showed it to the collector. They spent 3 months. They got the hold of the CD in April 2010. It was only in August 2010, using various things like what was the crop pattern in the background, what were the trees growing, etc. Were they able to identify where in the district this little taluk and this little village was and found this girl. So I think it's very important to understand that sexual proclivities are the same all over the world, and with technology, the world is truly flat. Can we keep going? Next one. So the next part, this was about the child pornography. The next part is about harm in the digital playground. What are young people up to online? Can we go to the next one? I know some of you have seen this presentation, so please don't tell them what this is. Can anybody tell me what this means? Those of you who have teenage kids? Okay, it's hi, you have a great sense of humor, rolling on the floor laughing, be right back, parents over shoulders. And this is the way young people are communicating. And this is quite ancient. This is what I found. And I'm sure it must be progressed a great deal from then. Can we go to the next one? So what are kids up to online? Just what are they up to online? Do we know what their practices and experiences are? One young man told me, ma'am, my dad puts a firewall in. Just to make him happy once in a way, I let something go through the firewall. But I've long since learned to circumvent the firewall. And that's the reality of the situation. And we lull ourselves into thinking that, just by banning the child do this and not allowing the child to access this, that we think, everything's, hunky-dory. It's not that way. I think we need to understand children now. They're a generation who are native to what they're doing. We are all, at least those of us on this my bracket, are all migrants to this whole medium. So we need to understand that you need to give young people and children a sense of safety online as much as you would give them offline. Can we go to the next one? This is from in just looking at child sexual abuse reports of young people on young people in August 2010. You will see a lot of them actually film the abuse they were committing on another young person, and one wonders what they did with those films then. Okay, next one. And next. This is very common. I don't know how many of you work in schools here? Very common complaint about for most schools is what kids are doing online, how they're posting pictures of their maths teacher bending over and saying, "What do you think?" Or let's rate her in terms of her bottom compared to other teachers, etc. They're being suspended from school. This was in Chandigarh, where 12 students were suspended for making comments. The other day, when I was doing a workshop at school, I was talking to them about this, and then the principal who was sitting next to me said, "You're talking about Chandigarh. You know what they said about me on one of their Facebook pages last week? They said I look like a plucked chicken because I dye my hair." And of course, the bunch of 9th standard kids started tittering, and I was also trying to not laugh. But just think about that. So we need to think of what are we doing with our young people? And parents complain to school saying, our child spends so much of time on Facebook. Whose problem is it? The child spends time on Facebook at home. You give them all these fancy gizmos without any understanding of how to use this technology. Next one. Next one, Nancy. Yeah, we are the second largest internet users. Demographics of the users dropping. Social-cultural norms. We do not want a young man and a young woman of 14 or going to the same school, sitting in the same class, to be talking for too long a time in the school playground, and yet we have no problems and have no idea what this young man and this young woman are doing online when they reach home and having probably the most sexualized conversations with each other. I think we need to wake up and smell the coffee. We need to understand that our physical, real-time socio-cultural norms is really allowing for an even greater unsafe environment online. We were all teenagers. Part of the charm of being teenagers is you just try and push your boundaries, take as many risks as possible. The whole fact that there is a courage of anonymity. The next one. The world's flat. I mean, a rock concert in Seoul is the same as a rock concert in Mumbai nowadays. Next one. Yeah, this was, for those of you who can't see it, it's about, there's this very sexualized poster out there, and this mother's closing the child's eyes, and the child saying, "But I've already downloaded the movie." And that's the reality again. The fact that I said that there's a whole difference in lifestyles now. I put this IPL ad up because it's changing the way young people also are relating to one another. The next one. And if you look at it, every parent in India, however difficult their circumstances are, they want something better for their child. So what they're trying to do is that they scrimp and save to buy their child that computer because they believe it's a leg up in the whole socio-economic mobility ladder upwards. And this is the Infosys campus in Hyderabad or Bangalore, wherever. So everybody's aspiring to give their children technology. We've moved straight from bullock cart to rocket science without the intervening stages. So young people these days don't know how to use this technology, and the people around them also have no idea how to kind of guide them and to use this technology, except being punitive about it. Next one. Rape play. How many of you know about rape play? There are 8-year-olds who are playing. There's just one hand going up, and that's Siddharth. That's with respect to that. Yeah. Rape play is, again, I wouldn't suggest any of you go into the site, by the way. Rape play is a game you can download off the net. You have 8-year-olds playing it. It basically gives you notch up your points depending on how fast you stalk a woman, how fast you tie her up, how often you rape her, whether you gang rape her, etc. And kids are playing this like a video game. They don't seem to understand what they are playing. But in many ways, it's desensitizing them. And these kind of games are dime a dozen. Rape play is just one of the games like this. There's dime a dozen on the net. So do you know what your kids are up to online then? Okay, next. Oh, next one. We want to see Rajnikant, yeah. Very common, again, if you talk to the police, they'll tell you a lot of times when an offense is committed, pictures are being taken of the offense. This was in Madhya Pradesh. Next one. And then, of course, we have government policies, which I'm sure Mr. Sarvade will talk a little bit about. Tamil Nadu gave out free laptops to everybody from the 10th, 12th, 11th standard upwards, without any sort of understanding of for these young people and how to use this technology. Assam followed, UP followed. And I'm sure every state is going to give it out as freebies and part of the poll promises. The MHA has a brilliant advisory. It's an excellent advisory on paper. I do not know how many people have actually following it. It's an advisory on cybercrime involving children. It's absolutely brilliant advisory. The National Policy on Children right now makes a specific reference to digital safety and keeping children's practices and experiences safe online. Next one then. Next one. Yeah, next one. Yeah, of course, POCSO and the next one, the IT Act 67B, have specifically looked at online grooming, looked at child sexual abuse images, looking at child pornography. But there's a whole gap between implementation and the law. Thank you, and I'd like to invite Mr. Sarvade up. I hope I've given you all enough ammunition for asking questions as well as for the discussion.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much, Vidya, for the very generous introduction. After listening to this presentation and the previous one, I'm feeling completely out of depth because I am not an expert on anything, and I don't have any very deep insights to share. But I think I do share this feeling that this is a very important subject, and it grows in importance with every passing day because of the increasing internet penetration and the problems that we see all around. Incidentally, the specific provision in the Information Technology Act about the child sexual images came because of Vidya's efforts herself before the standing committee. And when the industry was not very keen to take up this issue because they thought it was distracting from their agenda of data protection and so on, it needed somebody who had passion for the subject to really step forward and bring the issue to the attention of the lawmakers. I had actually jotted down some points to talk to you about, but some of those have already been covered. I will just take maybe a couple of minutes to talk about the law enforcement perspective on this. And today, of course, I got invited, today I'm working as the Chief Executive Officer of Data Security Council, which is a very specific industry-oriented, government-oriented think tank policy body. So my remarks are purely in my personal capacity as a former law enforcement officer, and probably that is the perspective which probably you may be also interested in. So when we look at the law, I think the law is pretty clear on abuse images, but the policies and the regulation which should be supporting the law are not really there, and the enforcement, of course, is woefully inadequate. So as was earlier mentioned, the distinction between pornography and child abuse images is not well made, and these two terms are used sometimes interchangeably without realizing that one is clearly an offense in most geographies, whereas pornography is not a crime in most countries. And thanks to this lack of understanding of the distinction, and also the very moralistic posture sometimes we see from decision makers, where very strange orders are passed about blocking of pornographic sites on the internet, and those orders have to be withdrawn because they are impractical, or there's a backlash around how these decisions are being made and so on. So in that whole dust which raises up into these kind of issues, the real issue of child sexual abuse images on the internet kind of gets sidetracked because these other issues take the front stage. So I think there is a clear lack of understanding of these two terms being different, and then of course requiring very different policy responses. The other point I wanted to mention was there is no understanding also of the whole changing dynamics around how children are growing up too fast, whether it is exposure to adult content, and it's not merely sexual content, it's about adult-oriented television serials or movies. Children just want to grow up too fast because they see a lot of exciting things when they grow up. Simple things like food adulteration with chemicals which lead to early puberty is something which again is completely missed out in policy making, and then the enforcement which should be around these kind of areas. So given the fact that children are, I think, becoming adult much earlier now as compared to the previous generation, thanks to richer food or adulterated food or exposure to adult entertainment. Uh, and then in particular in India, the taboo around sex education, which kind of doesn't give them the rational facts which will help them to really take their own decisions, so to say. I think we have a very dangerous situation where we will continue to see the very egregious situations that we come across, and where very young children are doing things which they don't even realize the outrageousness of those kind of things. So I think these are some of the things which are important. On the law enforcement side, and probably you would be less familiar with this, uh, I just wanted to understand your, how well do you know law enforcement? In Maharashtra, for example, out of 6 lakh government employees, the police force is actually one third of the government's workforce. So, what is the kind of budget they should be getting to do their job? Any guess? One third, 25%, 20%? So the police force gets less than 5% of the state budget because it is seen as a cost center. Nothing very, no revenue coming out of the police department. So what happens is, given the fact that it has 2 lakh people to pay salaries to, they spend 91% of their salary, their budget on salaries, and then another 6 to 7% goes on paying petrol, vehicle, electricity, office expenses, and so on. So what they have for training and investigation and modernization is 2% of the budget. Now you know why you see no big initiatives coming from police. The police budget on CCTNS, which is the core computerization project in Indian police, was supposed to have cost 2,000 crore over a period of 5 years, and it was being funded by the central government. And now that the new finance commission has said that states will get 12% more of the receipts, tax receipts, central government has stopped funding to this particular project as of now. State governments, of course, as you know, they have their own priorities and they are not going to spend money on police computerization. With the result that when we talk of, you must be seeing the serials where they get fingerprints, lift fingerprints through using laser techniques, and the CSI cyber and CSI, what you have, is not going to happen in India because we don't have databases which will really support that kind of very advanced way of working. And you do know how many 1,000 crore get on buying aeroplanes for an airline which is all the time in losses? So there you have the priorities which are there. I'm sorry if I sound very aggrieved because I am a former police officer and I always feel very bad about not getting the resources to basically do the provide the citizen services. The last point I wanted to make was, in this online world, there are various players and it is not clear who is responsible for what. Now the people who provide connectivity are the internet service providers, and in many places it is thought that they are best suited to provide some kind of handholding to the users because they are in touch with the users. They can provide software which will block certain kind of things, where they can help in resolving hardware problems and so on. They have no incentive because it's a commodity business. They have no money to really do anything beyond than just provide a cable and then disappear. They will not even take your calls after that as long as you're paying your bills. So who benefits from this online internet business? Is it government by way of better taxes? Are there online e-commerce sites which are doing better? Or are these platforms who generate thousands of crores of money through online advertisements and search revenue? So if they are going to benefit, then whose job is it to provide handholding, to provide resources to really monitor the problems as they're happening and then do interventions which will be most effective? Of course, the most important entity in this whole equation is the parents and the schools. As Vidya said, they have no clue what's happening around them, and neither will they be able to do anything unless there is a very clear policy response in putting the responsibility where it belongs, allocating resources, and then ensuring that those programs run well. So I'm sorry if I have put some very radical thoughts on the table, but this is what I wanted to say from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sarvade. In fact, there is something called the Model Child Pornography Legislation, and it looks at 4 parameters. And in 2006-5, I remember India was 0 on all of them. And now we've actually hit 3 out of 4. We have checked boxes in 3 out of 4. The 4th one, which we've not checked still, and that is because of the reluctance of industry, is the whole responsibility of internet service providers to take down sites on their own. I remember a couple of years ago at the UNODC meeting, when this was brought up, the ISAP, Internet Service Providers Association of India, went into a complete aggressive mode saying, you can't expect us to do it, only government can do it. I think it's also important for the audience here to understand how cert.in works. When you want a page taken down, you find something objectionable, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have to write to you have to go to the cert.in site, you find the link to the page where you download, you explain what is the problematic about the page you're seeing, you send it to them, then they evaluate it, and then they decide whether they should take it down or not. In that meantime, interim period, you're going to have 20 more sites up on the same subject. Am I right?
Right. So takedown as a strategy doesn't really work because people who are going to put up those pages will always find other sites to do it. I used to work in a bank, and banks are also worried about fake bank sites coming up, and they actually have agencies which monitor the internet for their brand, and then those sites have tie-ups with ISPs across different countries. So those sites get taken down very fast, and the turnaround time there can be as short as a few hours. But is it possible to do it for all kinds of sites? I don't think it may be that feasible.
Okay, the interesting thing is the same ISPs, which are most of them a lot of the multinationals, they all belong to two coalitions which are operating worldwide in a lot of countries. This is the Technology Coalition Against Child Pornography and the Financial Coalition Against Child Pornography. And you name it, and they're all in those coalitions. They work across Southeast Asia, they work across Australia, New Zealand, America, etc. But strangely enough, the same MNC in India is not willing to do anything, go beyond what they have to do in this country. And I think that's something we need to think about. Why is there a different yardstick when that company is operating in another country and now that country is operating in India when it comes to child abuse images? So, and that's something the Internet Service Providers Association of India, I think those of you interested, you can write to them and ask them. You'll probably set the cat among the pigeons, is to ask them what is their stance in addressing child sexual abuse images. And it'll be very interesting to see their response.
So if I can add here, the Internet Service Providers Association probably represents only the technology infrastructure people who just give you a pipe. Now, there are other players who are also there, like who have large sites which have large number of users, Facebook and WhatsApp and so on. Now, to the point of having adequate resources within country to deal with problems arising here, I think that's a very important thing, because this is something which even law enforcement keeps talking about, saying that if they have to get subscriber details of a particular person on WhatsApp, for example, there is not a single person on WhatsApp in this country who can really take those requests and act on those. You mentioned about how a page in an Indian language was treated as a innocuous page, though it was obviously in the local cultural context was highly damaging. I think they need to really invest, because if they are going to get users and maybe not so much revenue as probably they get in other countries, but there is a moral responsibility on them to really ensure that whatever malicious activities happening around that platform is curbed to the extent possible, and for that they need to have very strong connect with law enforcement, very strong connect with the users, where you can report and get pages taken down as quickly as it's possible.
The most common refrain we've heard when we talk to young people, when we do online safety workshops for them, is that there's no centralized online reporting system. You have to actually go to the whole course of going to a police station, filing a case, probably will be sent to cybercrime division. Is there any move, this whole 400 crore investment of government on setting up a central cyber center to deal with child pornography, is there any move to have some centralized reporting system on cybercrime?
Right. So this has been a very interesting and I would say heartening development, that central government actually appointed a expert committee, and the committee said, let us improve reporting. And they all specifically talked about how women and children are being targeted on the internet. Now in India, of course, the law enforcement is a state government problem, and the central government can only do so much. They don't really have the responsibility to do it on the ground. But they can set the agenda. They can create a model where referral can happen to the state governments, and provided the state governments agree to use that information which is reaching them. So I think as a direction setting project, this should be very useful. Improving reporting itself will be very good, but again, each report has to be taken to logical conclusion. So I think again we need to come back to prevention as a strategy. where how to reduce the incidence itself is something which needs to be thought about. I don't really not much in favor of having a very centralized approach to these things, because if you look at each site has their own terms and conditions, and the way internet works, it is expected to be that way, that there cannot be a central control in any case. So whoever is using a platform should understand the channels of grievance redressal through that platform, and they should use them firstly, because that is, as a user, it is their responsibility as well to escalate issues to the knowledge of the platform, and then see that if the process doesn't work, then then it should go to law enforcement and other forums. So I think a decentralized approach, where knowledge will really empower the users, is something which we should look at.
Is DSCI looking at something of how they can get the HRD ministry to introduce online safety into school curriculum?
Uh, just briefly talking about DSCI's initiative. So, one of the strong initiatives DSCI has been running for the last 8 years, 7 years, it has been in existence, and earlier with NASCOM also, is to train law enforcement in understanding the cyberspace. So, the first cyber lab was set up in Mumbai in 2004, and that lab has been training police stations officers and so on, those people who have no clue as to what is internet and what is cyberspace, in understanding the medium, get them familiar with the crimes which happen there, what kind of evidence collection should happen, and so on. So that is one initiative which is running, and there are similar labs in other locations: Bangalore, Pune, Chennai, Hyderabad, Calcutta, and one in Haryana. And of course, it all depends on how much industry sponsorship is available. DSA itself is a not-for-profit body, dependent on how much money is available through projects and so on. So we have submitted a large project on awareness on various aspects of safety and security, especially in the context of Digital India. And we are hopeful that if we get the support, then we'll be able to run more of these initiatives.
In schools as well?
So, as I mentioned, prevention actually is the key to a lot of it, and we don't really want to create a very strong police force, because responding to every event is not possible, nor is it desirable, nor is it effective. So we need to go back to how to reduce the incidence, and a lot of research will be required to do there, saying that what is the incidence, what are the strategies to reduce that incidence, and how do we use the resources to really address that part much better than the response part.
Last year, David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the UK, realized that online safety was one of the biggest threats to children in the UK. And he organized an international conference organized by the Prime Minister's office. It was called We Protect Children Online. And you had Prime Ministers of New Zealand, Canada, and heads of state of 51 other countries actually attending this conference, which was on protecting children online. And true to form, India was noticeably absent from this conference. We didn't even have a representative of the Indian embassy at the conference. And the second conference is happening in November, and they really would like India to be there. We have a Google head who is from India. We have a Microsoft head from India. We're the second largest internet users in the world. Every industry which is working on ICT's, information community technology, is landing in India, because they realize this is a huge market in sheer raw numbers. But the government's attitude, is it ignorance? Or is it just like trying to wish it away, or do they just don't think it's a priority? I mean, I know you're not from government, but what do you think? You work closely in Delhi.
No, so I don't really. Okay, so I think we lack specialization in the whole policy making layer in the government, and there is not enough ownership of issues. So you will not see a person working in one particular area for many years, and that leads to frittering away of the experience and what insights can come out of that. Personally, one of the reasons why I left government was I wanted to work in the area of cybersecurity, and I saw that if I go back after my stint with NASCOM, I will get posted in traffic and then in prisons and so on, and there will be no opportunity to really work on this area, which was even then very clear that is going to become very important. So I think people need to take their own individual decisions, but incentives in government to encourage specialization and encourage more passion about what work they're doing probably will help. Just
Maybe we should all tweet Mr. Modi's Twitter handle, say that you should represent yourselves in all these international conferences, at least national conferences and online. Just before we get into Q&A, we have time for Q&A? Yeah. I'd just like to tell you all there's a whole bunch of very interesting websites for young people on engaging with on understanding what online safety is, written and created for young people by young people. For those of you interested, I'll send the list of sites to Suchi, and she can send them out when she sends the wrap up email. Yeah.